Welcome to the A New Narrative podcast, where we discuss all things health and human design. I'm Sam Zagar, your projector guide and host. This is a show about deconditioning. My goal is to confront our conditioned, not self narratives so that we can write them anew through the lens of our true selves. It's through this process that I hope to guide you to your signature life. Okay, so today we have Nadia Scott, and she is a 1-3 pure generator. Now, I brought her onto the podcast today because I found her on Instagram, and let's just say the satisfaction was palpable, but the story of how it came to be was really interesting. I knew I was going to want to explore more of it. And once I started to hear a little bit of it, I knew I wanted the audience to be able to hear what I was going to hear. So I asked Nadia if she would want to come on the podcast, and she said,
yes. And here I am.
Hi, Nadia. It's nice to have you on. So tell me a little bit about yourself. Why don't you tell me where you're from?
I am from Newcastle, which is in the north of England.
Okay. And when did you find human design?
Human design came to me a couple of years ago, but it came to me from, let's say, a source that I wasn't convinced by, should we say. So I met this woman at a retreat and she ran up to me and she went, "You're a manifesting generator. You're a manifesting generator." And I was like, whoa. And she said I was exactly like her. And when I looked into it, I wasn't a manifesting generator. But then I didn't look much more because I didn't really trust the source. And then through a health journey that I've been on for 5 years, I started wanting to explore why I got sick. And that led me to human design. And I bumped into a human design expert, a guide called Talis, in Portugal on a little retreat I was on, reading a book, and he just approached me and started telling us about myself in a way that I was like, wow, like I felt like he crawled out from inside of us. He knew so much. And I couldn't believe that he got so much information from this little body graph chart. So that just took me on a journey of going and having a full detailed reading, and then being a 1-3 profile, I never stopped investigating it since. And I've been living into my design for the last 4 months now, like fully given into the line days and the strategy, understanding my determination, environment. So yeah.
Okay, one of the interesting things that I gathered from that is the first person who taught you about it was a manifesting generator. And they brought it to your awareness, but didn't necessarily make you feel seen or recognized by it. But then your next encounter was with a projector, and a projector was able to see and recognize you differently.
Yes. Yes. He was a
Okay.
mental projector.
Now, it is your health journey that is the most interesting to me because while the entire system of human design is very interesting to me, I like all of it. I have a personal love for anything that is body side, anything that is specifically health based. I really like studying PHS. I like form principle. And in particular, I'm really kind of gearing up to focus on this more to help people beyond 2027 when the coming cycle changes and we no longer have, we'll call them the tribal supports. We won't have a lot of the infrastructure that we're used to having right now for health. In many ways, we're going to be a lot more on our own for health, which is going to be a downside and a plus side in a variety of ways. To be more on your own for health means that you get to be more differentiated. It's more specific to you, but it does lack the support of other people. When I think about health beyond 2027, it's going to require us to be our own health authorities. Now, I don't want people to hear that and think like automatically, the individual is smarter than the doctor, right? Like there is education that can come into things, but nobody has the ability to really know how things actually feel for us on the inside other than us. So we always have to be such big participants in our health, big advocates for our health. An advocate to me is almost like foreplay for the word authority. First, you can advocate, but then you really become an authority on it. So you would have been through a lot of different conversations with other people in regards to your health, but there comes a point in which you became a really big active participant in your recovery. Now, I want to know, you're going to have to take me back to the beginning a little bit so we can give people some context here. But how did you know you had a health problem to begin with?
It goes back when I was 21. I had my son. I was young, pregnant at 21, and it was 6 months after I had my son. I was on my first night out to celebrate, being a mother, and I collapsed in one of the night in the toilet of a bar downstairs, and I was just bleeding from my bowel, just blood pouring out of me, and that was the start. And from then, it was a constant journey of investigation. They didn't know why these ulcers were forming in my bowel, and they were just bursting on like main arteries, which were causing huge. I used to have a huge amount of blood transfusions at the time, like throughout the 20 year. So it was later diagnosed as cellular ulcer syndrome, which
Mm-hmm.
generally is only a cellular ulcer that from an unknown cause, could be something you've ate, like a fish bone, gets stuck in your rectum and could cause a bleed. But I was getting clusters of these ulcers, and they weren't just in the rectal area, so they were all in the lower part of my bowel. And that journey went on for the first 10 years, all of my 20s, I was hospitalized in 60% of the time I was in hospital. And when I wasn't in hospital and I was outside, I was always in a wheelchair at that time. Um, by my late 20s, early 30s, I had an ileostomy bag on. It removed most of my large bowel, still unknown to why these ulcers were coming. Um, I had that many blood transfusions, it changed my blood type. I ended up with a blood virus in my blood. Um,
You changed your blood type?
I had that many, yeah, my blood antibodies and my blood changed to an O rhesus negative. I had They had to blood transfuse me with a negative blood because that was all that they had left in the hospital at the time, and it created an autoimmune virus in my system that they said I would have for the rest of my life.
Wow. So current, so for eight, eight, nine, borderline 10 years, we have major surgeries, no real answers, and actual mutations to the body that cause an immune shutdown.
Yeah.
Okay.
What they had
So,
said, they'd even got asked at one point, I was under psychiatric help to see if there was some way I was causing this disease that I was put under. I remember having asking if I was harming myself, and I thought, how can I put ulcers in my bowel? I was like 20, well, I was very young mother in hospital, ripped away from my child. This little baby was growing up without Aidan was growing up without his mom around. Um, and there was no cause. And it took 7 years for the local hospital to send me to London, which is the capital, to get a specialist from Europe to fly over and perform this groundbreaking surgery where they were going to reconstruct my bowel with pigskin. But it
and
didn't
did
work.
that happen?
That one didn't work, but the next one did. And what he managed to do was this was now my 27th operation, and I had several laparotomies. Um, and what they'd done was he reversed the bag, and then I ended up getting a rectal vaginal fistula. Um, what is it called? A fistula. They penetrated my wall, pierced it, so it formed a hole, and that hole was there for several years. It had more operations repairing the damage that they'd done for a mistake in an operation than I actually needed to have for my bowel in the end. And this surgeon came over and the pig skin didn't work. My body rejected it instantly, hours after surgery. So I was taken straight back in. And he got my small intestine and stretched it down past my colon to graft over the holes and then stitched it around the bottom part of my anus. So I don't have any real muscle or rectum there anymore, but I don't have the bag on. And I haven't had the bag on for a good 12 year now.
Okay, now staying in this timeline and really wanting to pull how you were actually feeling through this process, especially for the interventions that were not effective or successful. Did you feel resistance from yourself in terms of having them done? Were you having any type of sacral no for this that you were overriding or didn't register as that? Or what kind of messages did the body give you?
I just don't think I was so disconnected from the body. I think I was so emotionally gone. My body was with Aiden. My mind was constantly trying to be with my child at the time. And through the whole thing, I was just do what you want. It got to a stage towards the end where I was just like, whatever you say. I was medicated on OxyContin from the age of 22. It had just been, it was a drug that was huge, as a huge pandemic still is in America. And it came over to the UK and I was put onto the first UK trials. So emotionally, I was gone. The amount of opioids that I was prescribed and the antiemetics that I was taking for the side effects of those drugs, my cognitive function, I was like a function. The only thing that used to light me up was when they would bring my son in. But other than that, I just give in to the system. My mum was my advocate. I didn't have a voice. I just had a mind that was constantly manifesting a life that wasn't what I was currently living.
So, throughout this process, while it all sounds very low, have we hit the lowest point in the story yet?
No, I think, well, there was lots of low points throughout the time, but I think the lowest and the catalyst is yet to come in my story, which was going into my 30s. I started weaning myself off medication and I set up businesses. I was very entrepreneurial, always managed to earn a living for myself for 20 years, always managed to run a business. I ended up getting really sick again and taken into hospital in just before Valentine's in 2019. And the only thing they could do was they just medicated me with right back up to the dose that I would just took months getting weaned off. By the time I came out of hospital, I was like an addict. I was itching. All I could think about was my medication. And I was woke up on my sofa, shocked back to life because I nearly over medicated on OxyContin because I woke up and thought I'd been asleep for hours. I was still in pain and went and just took it again. And it might have only been a few minutes or an hour. And it was that shock. That was the catalyst. From that day, I never ever touched not one bit of medication has ever entered my mouth since I woke up from that.
When I'm looking at your body graph, I'm okay. So I'm going to give the audience a little bit more information as they're hearing this story. So Nadia has two channels. We have the channel of curiosity that goes from the ajna to the throat. And we've got the channel of rhythm that goes from the G center to the sacral center, which means she has four centers defined: ajna, throat, G, and sacral. It also means that she has a lot of undefined centers. So we have an undefined head. So this one is under pressure to know the answer, but it doesn't know what the answer is. We've got an undefined ego that wants to prove its worth, and the undefined ego has a very hard time quitting things. You know, quitting, proving, willpower, anything to do with willpower is the gift of the defined ego. So when I see an undefined ego, I know that you are already up against a bigger challenge in that you do not have the willpower that some people do to be able to quit these things. And I know that, we tend to universalize a lot of things, like the idea that like a person can or can't quit medication. We look at it as a person can. We're not looking at the definition of this person and what other kind of supports they might need in order to do that. You've got an undefined spleen. So there's awareness that has to be learned about, is this healthy or not? So the idea that you have an internal definition that can trust this is healthy or not, you're missing that again. So there's the unsure of what you're doing is whether or not it's actually to your benefit. We've got the undefined root. So we know that you're under pressure, that you're running out of time. That tells me, a lot of, I'm imagining you in the hospital trying to get through something. You don't have access to your son. I think your head is going, when are we going to figure out what's going on here? I think your spleen is going, I don't know who I can trust in this. I think your ego is going, I really want to quit this, but I'm going to need help to do it. I think your root is going, when am I going to see my son? He's growing up. I'm missing out. And then I think I've got this undefined solar plexus that has, well, and this is where it's a little bit different. You have a totally open solar plexus. So if all your undefined centers or all of your openness, you are naturally going to maintain the most wisdom in this solar plexus. So you do have an innate wisdom about truth and confrontation. But I also think that to really be comfortable with truth and confrontation, you truly have to believe that you are an authority of your life. Otherwise, you will buckle against anything that feels like a bigger authority figure. And, you're dealing with these health conditions where people are, in theory, better or more classically or traditionally educated on what you're going through. So you're having to put your trust in them, but then you're being consistently let down by the fact that these surgeries are not actually giving you what you're supposed to be getting. And then to compensate for that, they're medicating you, which is giving you a bigger problem for the ego because you're going to have to get off of it again at some point. So I see all of these not self dilemmas that you've got going on. And really, the only way out of our not self dilemmas is strategy and authority. So somebody has to ask you yes or no questions like, do you want this? Are you ready for this? Can we proceed here? Does this feel good for you? But we also have the acknowledgement of you saying, I'm so disconnected from my body. Even if you asked me, I don't know if I would have been able to trust or rely on that answer that came up. So I think what the listeners would really, really appreciate knowing is there is this tenderness in the bottom. And I asked if you had hit the low low because I was quite sure that you hadn't yet, only because you weren't talking about the comeback. To me, you don't get the comeback until you hit the low low. And it sounded like you had a lot of very low lows, but they were still getting you to some level of breaking that maybe in theory was necessary. I really struggle with how necessary or how destined or fated some of our experiences might be. Do you feel like it was necessary what you had to go through, or do you think it was ridiculous what you had to go through?
No, it was very necessary. And I couldn't have looked back on that situation and be more thankful that that happened. I feel like it was a sign. I've had other big signs since then from the universe that I've took and shifted again in the last 5 years, but that was a big sign, I believe. Like, they say your health comes in and, it can tap you on the shoulder, and sometimes it might take a bus to knock you over. It literally took for me, my body to get to ground zero and see me life flash before my eyes before I realised the fatality of what was actually happening and how much I'd disconnected and how much I'd fought for my son. But if I continued, I would be no more. If I just give in to the doctors and the medicine, I would be a walking zombie till I didn't wake up. And seeing that
So
realization was just, it was, and I'm an all or nothing person as well, extremes. And it was brutal. It was a brutal journey of withdrawal. but very necessary.
So it sounds to me like the day of change was the day that you almost overdosed.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's such a third line story. You know, you almost overdosed, but you learned what not to do. And you made so this is one of the important third line lessons. You know, third lines are very trial and error. We have to learn the hard way. We're always going to break the bond. We're always going to make our mistakes. It's how we learn. But we're not supposed to be repetitive fuck ups. You know, it's the point isn't to never learn the lesson. The point is to learn what wasn't working and apply that and eventually make it work. So what did you realize was not working for you and how were you open to trying something differently?
And I knew my mind wasn't mine and I needed to get my mind back. That was, I needed to get back my mind and get back in my body and take control of my life. I needed to, and I'd done that. And it was a very, I'd done it in such a psychotic way, I think, as well, because I planted the medicine all around the house where I could see it as I made the decision to, with like, I'm not taking, I thought if anyone hides it, I'm going to go hunting for it, and then that's going to occupy my mind. And I knew what the withdrawal was going to feel like because I used to feel that feeling when I knew it was time for my medicine, but the doctors told me that was the pain coming back on. And yeah, I'd done every type of holistic therapy I could imagine. I was smoking green. I did smoke a lot of green at the time. I was doing sound therapy, shock therapy, cold water therapy, tapping. Um, in the first from day 4 to 14 was horrendous. But then after that, the light started to lift and I would stop being sick and I could start, the voices were quieted in my mind and I could start feeling that I was coming back to something I'd never been before. And then every day from that 3 month period, I just got stronger. I researched how to repair my cognitive function, what herbals I needed to take to repair my brain receptors. I knew everything could be healed. And yeah, I spent a good 2 years just working on cleansing those drugs out of my system.
Now, one of the things that you just said, I love when people, it's almost like you're sneaking in your keynotes into everyday conversation. I think that's one of the coolest ways to identify what somebody is. So you said the phrase, the light started to come back in. And then you talked about your cognitive function. So your determination is direct light. And for anybody listening who doesn't know what determination is, this is how we feed the brain. In human design, there are 4 transformations. There's one transformation for each of the variables, but they do have a sequence with which they develop best in. Ideally, we nourish the person's brain from birth onward. We're going to focus on feeding this baby and helping them cognitively develop to their greatest potential. Now, most of our parents are not educated on what our determination is, which is why food is the number one homogenizing force on the planet. You eat what your parents gave you. Most of us even grew up in a time where you finish what they put on your plate as well, or you're in trouble, right? Like you're going to eat what I served you, how much of it I decide you're going to eat. I chose what's for dinner, right? Like we don't have a lot of autonomy in the beginning for food choices. And it's the number one transformation that every other transformation depends on. So if I hear that you had an issue as early as 21 years old, that's before Saturn return. That's before the environment is significant to your body. That tells me that the most important thing that your physical body needed was to feed its brain properly from 0 to 21 years old in order to set you up for the rest of what you were going to need. Now, how much was being in the sunlight a part of your childhood, a part of being a teenager? A lot of what the experiences I'm hearing about, especially for the sick time, they sound like they're indoors. They sound like they're nighttime. They sound like they're away from being outside in the natural light. I think that, I mean, don't get me wrong, you only went to the club the one time we talked about it. It didn't negatively affect you. But then we're in a hospital for a very long time, right? I'm wondering how much of, I don't think the doctors asked you if you wanted to go in the sunlight to fix your ulcers, right? Like that's not a typical question.
No,
So, do you think that your brain was nourished the right way for most of your life up until this point?
definitely not. Now that I've discovered human design, the biggest part of my journey over the last 4 months has been undoing the conditioning of the not self to find out exactly what environments and how I'm supposed to respond. Because I do believe through my discovery, I found, and I'm going through alchemy training, I'm 6 months in to becoming my own alchemist. And there was so much I believe was thought and environment as now what I believe made me sick, not blaming my parents or anybody that done the best they could, but the thought and the upbringing and the environment in which I was surrounded by looking reflected black, I think had a huge impact on what led me into hospital. And then the hospital environment kept me there because when I look back at it now, with the recovery I've done and it's continued to cleansing the disease out, this could have been done 20 years ago just with diet and yeah, how you feed your brain and just working out your thoughts, being in eating in sunlight, seasonal foods. It's I've done a lot of work recently on forgiving myself for not finding this sooner for my son. That was the bit of letting go I've had to let go of recently, thinking if only I found this, if only I had the brain and the capacity to research the way I do now back then, um, it would might have been different. But then I wouldn't be who I am today and learned the lessons that I have learned to share. So
I think, you know, when you say I wish I had known this before. I felt like you feel bad that you didn't know this information. You know, my immediate thought is, well, that's silly. Why would you feel bad about this, right? Like there's nothing that could be done about this. But actually I think it is good that you think this way because, you know, mental health is obviously such a big part of your experience in this. And when we look at your mind is fifth color. So we have guilt motivation. Now, when people hear guilt motivation, they immediately have a negative reaction to it because nobody wants to think that they're supposed to be motivated by guilt. But it's not the actual feeling of guilty that is a driving force. It's the awareness of responsibility, the awareness that you have power and you are responsible in how you handle certain things. The transference for you is second color, which is hope. And hope is something that hospitals are full of. There is this sense of like surrender, you know, like almost give it up to God, give it up to the higher power, give it up to even if the doctors are a higher power. I hope the doctor knows what they're doing. I hope the surgery goes well. I hope because there was very actually little that you could do with your guilt motivation because the guilt says I'm personally responsible. But in your case, there wasn't the awareness of what to be responsible for in the beginning. So I think that the mental health problems would have been really intense whenever you're in the institutionalized spaces because you're not seen as the authority. And then I think also within the institutionalized spaces, the aura density is higher. You lose who you are when you're in groups. When you're in a penta, you become part of a penta, not yourself. And when you're in a bigger group, again, you lose aspects of yourself. So in a way, when you go into these bigger institutionalized settings, you don't really become you. It's almost like you become a number and a number that is supposed to be hopeful. And it makes you feel very, very powerless. But I want to acknowledge that when you think, you know, I wish I had more power here. I wish I could have done something with that. I do think that that is the right orientation for your mind as long as it doesn't go too far in the direction of shame, because we know that the third line profile can also be like, you know, you're not any better or worse of a being for not having that awareness that you had before. The question is, once you get the awareness, then what do you do with it? So it sounds like the more education that you gave yourself, the more you became aware, the more you started to advocate for certain things. This is where we start to have the upswing towards your recovery a little bit. So after you almost overdosed, how did you advocate for yourself differently?
I I didn't I refused medication. I refused
Mm-hmm.
all therapies from the NHS, to be fair. I didn't go back to the doctor. I rang them up halfway through to ask if there was anything to help with the symptoms of the withdrawal because it's quite brutal. And their advice was you shouldn't have come off the medication without our authorization, and we suggest you go back on. So their advice to me 2 weeks in was to put wean me back on. So that was me done with them. And then I just done I just looked for nature. It was cold water therapy originally that really helped me through, following Wim Hof and breath work for the symptoms. Um, and then just follow meditation came to me then, and it was very hard at first, but meditating and tapping, and that was my pain management for about 2.5 years. And then in 2022, another huge catalyst, but I call this the Big Bang now. My partner, my life partner at the time, being with for 9 years, we were due to get married, had built businesses together, big house next to the sea, raised his children. He was hiding a gambling addiction, and I lost everything overnight, businesses, house, everything was gone. And um, and there was, not nice people coming after like about wanting their money. So I had a total reset, and my disease flared straight back up. My condition was, I was constantly back at the toilet, and I knew then this was emotional. And I went back to the hospital, and they'd said I'd kept a stool and food diary. I knew the general routine, keep a diary, bring it to the hospital. And I had to go back into the hospital. And it took ages to get back into me surgical team again. And their recommendation was, you've got something called, I had some tests. They said I had a new condition now, another one called BAM syndrome, which they felt the best result given my condition of cellular ulcer syndrome would be to look at having the bag put back on. That they were going to go through a series of other tests to have a look at the gut bacteria, but ultimately that would be what the recommendation was. And I just walked out of there and I thought, not, excuse my French, not a fucking chance are you putting your hands on me. And I went to a healing retreat, um, and just contemplating life at this point, thinking, where do I go from here? Like, what do I do? And I met this health coach because she was juicing at this health retreat, and she had this water machine, ionized water, and she said, I was telling her my story, and she said, have you thought about juicing? Have you looked at these alternative things that you might be able to do? Don't don't hand yourself back over to them again. Let me work with you for a little while and see. So I started investigating juicing, and I found these books by a Professor Arnold Etheridge, and it's called The Mucusless Diet Healing System. And I read that from back to back, and I read it about 5 times, and it was all about how he'd transitioned back to a Fagorian, and it was quite extreme, but he cleansed this disease out of his system through enemas, juice, and water fasting. I got all the kit in. I'd done the transition diet for 3 months, come off animal fats, built myself up into the March, and then I went on a full 3 month juice and water fast, and I was doing up to 4 to 5 like pure lemon juice enemas eventually a day. And yeah, I was pulling mucus. I was pulling the disease. I lost 9 stone. I was a lot bigger than this, and I was pulling the mucus out of my system, my nose. I passed out on the bathroom a couple of times through the enemas and the berry shots, but I did literally put myself on nature's operating table. I wasn't telling anyone really I was doing this because everyone would have, my family thought I was absolutely crazy. They thought I had gone anorexic, I'd lost the plot. Um, but then, and I was very, very low at the very early stages, but then I went into this sort of bubble of I was meditating to my organs, I was speaking to my body, I was feeding it this juice, and I just went in this sort of this little sort of like silo where I just existed on this journey, and I was nobody could. I just had to get to the end, and I kept fasting and checking my tongue to see. And the book said that when there's no coating left on your tongue, your body should be free of latent disease. And eventually, I done my last fast, and my tongue was quite clear. And I thought, I think I've done it. And I never really knew medically that I had shifted it until they took me mobility car offers, the government. They didn't tell me in any other way, like through scans or anything. They didn't give me any results from my scans, but I used to get help with a mobility car because I used to be in a wheelchair, and I had it for years. And they must have done this automatic review through the summer period where they've accessed medical records, and I just had scans, and it was the car people that told us that there was nothing wrong with us. I was like, so then I had to ring the hospital and say, hi, can you tell us what my test results said? And they confirmed, this says we can't find any bacterial or balm or any disease in your system. There's no bacteria there. And that was it gone.
So this required you to take a lot of personal responsibility, to trust in nature. Just now, I hear that there were consistent responses. There was the response to the woman who asked you, have you ever tried juicing? So you were asked a yes or no question about whether you had tried something. So we asked a third line sacral being, and we got an answer. And that answer was directive to you in some way. Ooh, okay, maybe I want to look into this. Ooh, okay, I like where this is leading me. Ooh, now I see this guy, he comes up and I like his work. Now I appreciate that you didn't necessarily think this is how they did it, so this is how I'm going to do it. Like you still maintained a level of, some of this might be a little extreme. This is how I'm going to play with it for like you adapted it to where you were currently at. And because the results consistently were good or better than expected, it motivated you to continue to take responsibility on your own.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, you mentioned a bunch of different therapies that you tried at one point, I would be paraphrasing to list them off again, but none of them sounded specific to your determination or your cognition. So if your determination is light, at what point did light come into your life in a more healing way? And so I wanted also to talk about, I think swimming was a part of this for a while, or still is. And in one way, we might look at this maybe like similar to cold water plunging. And it maybe very much is cold water plunging, but at what time of day is it being done at?
Always through the day. So I literally rise and fall with the sun now. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I do me swimming. I doing a pool, so it is very light. I spend a lot of time in yoga I do outside in the garden. Um, I eat in light. I only eat, and it's generally always in daylight. I don't really eat in artificial lighting anymore. Um, I didn't realize that until the last 4 months, once I discovered human design. But then when I reflect on the differences that I feel from being outside in the direct light to the times when I haven't been, I can see how I was not self. But yeah, they're the things. Most that I'm asleep when it's dark now. I do very little in the dark.
Now, you acknowledged multiple times about how you felt so disconnected from your body, even if people had asked you or tried to engage your sacral response. You don't know if you would have been able to really hear that signal. in retrospect now, when did your sacral start to wake up? When did you start to actually feel the energy of, I'm pulled towards this? This is expansive to me. This makes me generate something that I want to pour into. When did you start to be able to go, well, that's what that is?
I'd say it was the back end of coming into 2020 when I felt like my mind, I've got ADHD as well. I've never taken medication for that, but I did feel problems with that when I came off the medication. I realized how ADHD I was. Um, and that's when I realized I had more, I started feeling more pull. I didn't know it was a gut response because I only really recognize that now since I understand human design. But once I was getting more clarity in my head, I started opening up more and responding more to and attracting more natural ways of living. And it just seemed to be this never ending journey I'll never jump, I'll never get off now. Um, but that was definitely when I got my mind back and it was clear. I could start
Now,
silence to hear my body more.
the more that it develops, now we it's gonna take us in a bit of a different direction for a second. But I think when people are new to human design, when sacral beings are new and they're told about their response and what this could feel like, it seems like this becomes like the primary goal, activating your response, activating your authority, knowing how to work with this. There isn't a lot of awareness or preparation for the often uncomfortable part that comes next. And when sacral beings start to respect their authority, they feel their yes and they go for it, or they feel their no and they respect it. I believe that this amplifies the magnetic reach of what the sacral does. The sacral is an attractive center, and I believe that the more powerful it is, the more it attracts. Now, that's not to say that everything that it attracts is good for it. We are attracted to life. There are a lot of gross things, dark things, dirty things that are attracted to life force energy. And I find this to be a more intense experience for sacral women because of the, let's just say, the societies we live in have, they still have a lot of patriarchal influence. When a woman is in her full satisfaction, it makes her very, very, very attractive. And she is going to then be approached or be brought things that she may or may not have wanted to attract. Do you notice that the more that you heal, the more in your power you are, people notice you more, people are drawn to you, you're getting more attention? And is there any way in which you haven't enjoyed that or it's been an uncomfortable experience?
Mm. Yeah, a couple of, I wouldn't say too uncomfortable because I can really handle it. But yeah, I think when there's been experiences when you're attracting attention of someone that you don't want. Um, but I do feel that even when I walk into a room now, like a networking event, I can feel I've had people come up to me at networking events and going, "Oh my God, I need to be your friend," and that's been their first response. And I know I'm very satisfied with my life right now. I've never felt more satisfaction in what I'm doing, um, and who I am and how I'm living. And everywhere I go, I feel people can see that. I feel like I really struggled with not initiating because that's been my design prior to this. It's how I've always operated. I've always had to make things happen for myself. I've always initiated everything in my life, and I've never thought, because I've always believed if I don't do it, it won't get done. I've always tried to take that position as a leader in business and set my own companies, be the managing director. When I reflect back, that's not even the position I should be in. I don't even enjoy it when I think about it. So the finding me design and setting up this new businesses I've got now, as I'm not running organizations, I've become independent, and just responding. I didn't think I'd ever anything would ever happen, and I can't believe how much I attract and have of to respond to just by being in places and showing up on certain line days. You know, like I do look at the days and think, well, I put my networking days on line 4 days, and I do. I can see the benefit. I see the benefit of, when I investigate on my line 1 days, and that's when I get my research and, I'm trialing and error. For me, I've always spent my life searching or looking outward for answers. Who am I? What am I here for? Why am I going through this? Why do these humans get this? Why do these humans do that? And I've forever been fascinated by human behavior. And now to be given something to follow and then see, I've been trying to prove it wrong for 4 months and I can't. Like that's my whole thing with human design was, okay, I'll prove this wrong. And my life coach, Jill, she's 70 and she's a 1.3 ego manifester. And it's done the same for her, completely identity shift. And we cannot deny, we've got a little study group going with it now with lots of her friends. We can't deny how satisfying life is when you just live the way you were born to live. And, you know, there's no point. They should give this with every birth certificate to every parent is their child's body graph, I believe.
I
And
would
that advice.
love parents and kids be more equipped with this information.
Oh,
Absolutely love it. Okay, so take me back to 20 years old. What was what was her life plan? What did she think she was supposed to be building? And why do you think she was so disconnected from her sacral?
she had a little bit of trauma, personal, like grown up trauma. She was a very live wire, always people pleasing, always trying to prove something, trying to make it in the big world of sales, going into big corporate jobs. Um, yeah, very, very disconnected from how I should have been living, initiating everything. I was in a very close and loving family, but there was also a lot of challenges and toxicity in that, and a lot of making and breaking of bonds, which I now know is my design, but I've always felt abandoned by that part of my design, to be fair. I've always felt abandonment, and now I know it's not. But I think I was very much I I didn't I didn't know at 20 anything other than going out. I was partying and trying to make it in the big bad world, and you know, probably abusing alcohol and substances at that time as well.
And I think a lot of the listeners are going to be parents. And I know it was hard for me to hear, being in the hospital and being separated from your son. I think that was probably like I personally feel that the most in all of this. It's one thing to be solo and have struggles in your life, but it's another thing to feel like you have people that depend on you and that we're failing them by not showing up for them or being there for them. The third line is going to feel so much shame around that. But it also sounds like you have a good relationship with your son right now. So I'm curious how your relationship with him evolved, how he came to understand your experience. What was it like to reconnect with him or rebuild your relationship with him as the true self that you are now?
Um, we've always had a good relationship, Aiden and I, and I felt carried a lot of guilt and shame around those first 10 years of his life, albeit he says, you were always there, Mum. We've always been really close. We've been through a lot together. He he is like my other half really now. He's 21, I'm 42. We both live together. I'm starting off life again in the house, and our relationship is very open and real. Um, it always has been. I've always been open with Aidan about situations in life, death's death. I've always taught him how it is. I've never dressed things up or called things that they're not, like, this is your penis, this is a vagina, death is death, life is life. And I've very much he lives to his human design. I was practicing it now. I got Aidan's reading done, and he's a manifesting generator. And it's really interesting now where we are both at in the journey of actually living to design, and me parenting more now, or guiding, because he's 21, and by design. And I can say, if I just had, I would have loved to have had this in front of me when I watch you and what you do with Maven. That's what got me following you, Sam, was how you parent. I just become obsessed with watching how you've integrated this system into your life, and you don't speak about the normal stuff you hear on human design podcasts. You talk at the level and the parent level and the environment and determination. And when I got onto you and seeing how you parented Maven, I was like, I'm going to get Aidan's human design done, because it's never too late. And we're going through that journey now together, looking at flats to move, like we're looking for a new house to go back to where we used to live. And we're both walking around like, out. We've got a very good, a much better understanding of each other, and a lot more acceptance around the things that I know, you aren't being awkward, you can't bloody help it. It's not in your design, or it is. And it's such a freeing, it's like an acceptance of yourself to think, God, it's okay not to be bloody trying to be brilliant at everything. And also to show that to your children. Like, this is who you are, and that is enough. And you don't need to be all the other things. And my passion now is I'm a coach and consultant, is to incorporate it into my coaching, but eventually I want to qualify, go through my training. But I want to help parents with human design. I think every parent should understand the design of their child, and to have that opportunity to raise them and guide them in the right way, so they don't end up with all this conditioning and bullshit we've been through. And if we could do that, then this world is going to could be completely transformed into the way it should be.
So I was listening to Rave Sociology this morning, and Ross talking about the influence of the penta, ultimately the family mechanics, the group, and how once you're in a penta, no one's really themselves. Like, there's a mechanism that ends up kind of taking over. And he was talking about parents raising their kids according to human design. And he said, I've said many times, human design is for the children. It's for the children. However, it can't be for the children if it comes through an adult who is living a conditioned not self life. As in, like, the only way that the parent can actually introduce the child to it is if the parent also understands what it is to have to play with these mechanics. And with Maven, there's this hesitancy with teaching Maven about his design for me. Let me rephrase that. There's a hesitancy in telling Maven to implement any aspect of his design for me. I will teach him about it all day as long as he is interested in it, but teaching and putting things into practice are different. For example, every time Maven asks me for ice cream, I want to cringe and say no. I just want to say no, because he's hot thirst determination. I know it's not good for him to have cold food. I know I'm literally dumbing my child down by allowing him to make the decision to have something cold. As someone who wants him to be healthy, I really want to override that decision. But I recognize that, when you have your kid's body graph, in a way, you get to play God in their life, because you've been given the awareness of what your child's ultimate potential is. And of course, you want to help them get to that if you're a reasonable parent. I really want to do a good job with my kid. He is the one living example of whether or not I could be a good parent. And there's this waffling of, is he going to do it? Is he not going to do it? Is he going to do it? And I have to hands off watch this experiment for the most part, right? Like I imagine if there is a God that designed and created. Now I say if only with respect of everybody else's belief. I study cosmology within human design. Studying it and believing it are different, right? Like I can't validate a lot of these things. I don't have the experience. It's not that point in time. I don't even have the intellect to validate a lot of these things. But I love the stories about what we are created by, what we are designed by, what the purpose of these designs are. Like I am very curious about the greater philosophical questions here. And I think that when we get our kids' body graph, we have this kind of like, ooh, do I want to be a god that is an ultimate authority and enforces my child's highest potential in their life? Or can they even get to that if I'm enforcing it? Is that actually allowing them to figure out what strategy and authority means? Or am I a further conditioning authority in this kid's life? So it's almost like I have the awareness of what his body graph is and what his potential is. And I just get to consistently watch and see, will he become this thing? And then I also have to think, what does my kid need to learn from me in order to be able to play with his body graph in the best way possible for him? So it's not necessarily teaching Maven that you're pure sacral. You have a response in the now. You have to follow that response now in order for it to work, right? Maybe what I have to teach him is the foundation that he doesn't have to trust other people that aren't him. He doesn't have to prioritize someone else's external authority. He is allowed to question my decision making. He is like, how do I teach him in a way almost a more critical thinking that allows him to become an authority of his own life without emphasizing the fact that it is a thought process that gets him there so he doesn't end up in his mind about it.
Mhm.
I got a lot of questions about how to actually give this to kids in a way that is the most powerful way for them to experience it and play with it.
Because you want them to learn for themselves. They need to figure it out for themselves as well.
Yeah, if I tell them it's right, I've defeated the purpose of the whole experiment.
Mm.
It sucks to know that you're right and not say anything, you know? Like, I just can't wait for you to grow up and be like, I was right. I was right, wasn't I, Maven? Tell me I was right the whole time, please.
Still tricky when they grow up. I'm telling you, Sam, you still can't really say I was right, wasn't I? They've just got bigger mouths to come back at you. I'm yeah, I'll just let Naden. He's got his body graph and he's got his reading, and I'm letting him delve in and out of it, and you know, suppose talking a lot about it and guiding. He seems to be responding well, but again, I couldn't overrule any decision. I never have overruled a decision he wanted. I think I've naturally let him choose a lot by my parenting style with Aiden as well. I've always asked him. I've always given multiple choice questions. Always asked him that way. Yeah.
Honestly, just asking them, asking. I mean, if I want my son to figure out how to be a good sacral being, as long as I remember to communicate to him in questions, there's a good chance he'll figure it out. If I let
Mm.
him answer his own questions and I don't argue with his answer too much or make him justify it, there's a good chance he'll turn out exactly how he's supposed to.
Yeah. Mm.
Okay. You brought up that you have had a lot of experience in corporate in the beginning that maybe was pushing you into more of the not self life. But through your health experience, you've landed in more of the coaching arena. So, how do you like to work with people in terms of their health now?
So currently I'm generally working with a lot of female founders of their own businesses that have health related stress issues, a lot of autoimmune. And I like to coach on a one-to-one basis. And I'm doing that, yeah, quite holistically, some's online, some's I like to do face to face where I can. It's mostly local women around the northeast, and coaching them on how to live a more balanced life. So I've sort of two sides of my business arm really, the coach and personal one-to-one, and then I do consult. I'm a bit of a bridge between government because that's what I used to do, and organisations, bridging the gap so that health and wellbeing services can access government funding to make their um, services more accessible to people that can't afford it. So I'm very passionate about promoting health and wellbeing and trying to align what I used to do into that so it's more aligned across the board with what I'm doing on both ends. So um yeah, I do a little bit of consultant and a little bit of coaching at the moment and finding my feet with them both, but really enjoying the independence of doing everything on my terms and at my speed and working with clients that align with my purpose now. Um, Still very daunting. I'm finding just getting out there myself again independently, but it's yeah, it's exciting.
I heard so much of the 1-3 profile in that. There was so much sharing information with people, but there was also the little piece about money. That might have been the only time that you really acknowledged much about money or cost, but hooking people up with different services, different ways to access things. And the 3 will always have some financial awareness to it because the 3 is the most aware of the cost of living in the Maya, the cost of living in this world, especially through our trial and error. The 3 has the closest relationship to things that are material. And through our trial and error process, we typically have a lot of negative experience with money. It is very common for the third line to have to learn a lot of hard financial lessons, really about what not to waste their money on or what not to spend their money on.
Mm.
I think that it's very cool that you brought a little bit of that, are you able to find the money? How are we going to resource the money? How are you going to pay for this? How are you going to get through this? Like there is some financial awareness to the struggle that is happening there. And then I also, when you said, I've been waiting to prove that human design isn't real, that's one of my favorite quotes for the third line. If human design has a flaw, the third lines will find it. We are the ones who find out what doesn't work. But I'm 5 years in and I have not found the place where this doesn't work yet. I'm still looking for the same thing too. I will never be like, I totally believe all of it. It's totally accurate. It's like, no, no, no. I'm still interested. I haven't found where it doesn't work yet. Guaranteed if I find the place where it doesn't work, I'm going to have to find like 3 other examples of that to back it up because like, well, what if that bad example was a bad example? Oh my goodness, right? I could spiral on that one. But I think that your experience brought you so many ways to test things, to play with things, to go, will this work for me? Will this not work for me? So you have tried many different things. You have learned about each one of those methodologies along the way. If someone were to come to you with the same issue that you had in your 20s, the amount of questions that you would be able to ask that person to discern what is actually going on for them in a way where your medical providers were not able to do that for you because they didn't have the personal experience. There's so much value that you
Mm.
get to bring into those future health conversations. And I think this is such a this is such a 2024 kind of thing to me, right? Like it's so transitional for leaving behind the tribal ways and going into the individual way of you're your own authority. You're who you have to rely on. How can we get you to communicate with your body, to trust your body, to make decisions for yourself and as yourself? You do really get to be an example for us. It would seem that we have just lost our internet connection with Nadia, and I was on my last question anyway, which is how can you find her if you want to work with her? So I'm going to include a little bit of that information below in the show notes or in the caption underneath. Thank you for listening. I'll see you next time.